splitting. The Prime Minister urges everyone to call out rule breakers, but to do it with kindness. There are no community COVID cases today, but there's new details of who was mixing with who when they shouldn't have been. Why are some people simply not getting the message? We talked to Auckland businesses feeling the bite at level 3 with reduced hours and staff cuts. The COVID collateral damage continues, and the Deputy Prime Minister joins us live. A gang shooting in Hawke's Bay leads to claims the government's delusional. Across the ditch, the Aussie Prime Minister's under pressure over a rape claim against one of his ministers. And a motley parrot rises to fame.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata at tēnei. The Prime Minister is urging people to call out others who are disobeying COVID-19 restrictions, but says it's not up to politicians to decide if rule breakers should be prosecuted. Auckland's been plunged back into alert level 3, in part due to recent breaches of the lockdown rules. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
A 21-year-old who should have been self-isolating visited numerous locations last week while potentially infectious. He picked up the virus from his mother, who'd been for a walk during the previous level 3 lockdown with another woman who was unknowingly infected with COVID-19. Jacinda Ardern says it's not okay for some people to break the rules and let the rest of the country down. Cabinet's made no decisions about stepping up enforcement, but Ms Ardern's asking people to call out family and friends for not following the rules. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The next group after border workers and their families to be vaccinated will be frontline non-border health workers. This group will comprise of 57,000 people. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says this only includes staff at the front line and interacting with patients.
Those involved in COVID testing, those administering COVID vaccinations, ambulance services, emergency department frontline workers, emergency response diagnostics, community midwives and well child workers who are working in people's homes, general practice frontline workforce that includes GPs, nurses and the receptionists who are dealing with patients.
Jacinda Ardern says pharmacy frontline workforce and NGOs, including Whānau Ora, will be included. She says vaccinations of that group is expected to start this month. The Ministry of Health says regular wastewater testing at an Auckland site near Papatoetoe High School continues to return negative results. Contact tracing continues for the 2 cases known as M and N, which were confirmed on Saturday. Their household contacts have been transferred to the Jet Park quarantine facility. The first 3 cases confirmed in the February cluster have now recovered. A North Auckland resident watched via the internet as trees near his house and business went up in flames this afternoon. Chris Seymour had left the city to look after a family member in Whangarei, but saw the fire in Greenhithe on Facebook. The blaze has now been contained, but 3 homes were evacuated. The police want to hear from anyone who has video footage of the incident that led to police fatally shooting a man in South Auckland last week. Officers were called to Avis Avenue in Papatoetoe on Thursday night after a shot was fired through the window of a home. The police say they tried to negotiate with Tangaru Noere Turia, but when he emerged from a house with a gun, he was shot. And the Mayor of Napier will meet with police after a series of serious shootings in the city. 2 people were injured in a clash between gangs at the Thirsty Whale nightclub in Ahuriri early on Sunday morning. 2 people are in police custody. Just over a year ago, a shooting incident in the suburb of Taradale caused uproar. Mayor Kirsten Wise is repeating her call for more help.
At the end of the day, I'm incredibly supportive of what our local police have been doing over the last 12 to 15 months. And I think that, we do need some additional resourcing and additional support from central government because we can't continue to have these types of incidents happening in our community.
Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise. The popular Netflix series The Crown has won the Golden Globe for Best Drama TV Series. It's been a virtual ceremony with hosts Tina Fey and Amy Poehler presenting from Los Angeles and New York. Best Actress went to Emma Corrin, who portrays Princess Diana.
Thank you so much to Diana. You have taught me compassion and empathy beyond any measure that I could ever imagine. And on behalf of everyone who remembers you so fondly and passionately in our hearts, thank you.
Josh O'Connor, who plays Prince Charles in the show, won Best Actor for his performance. It's 4 minutes past 5. Netball New Zealand remain optimistic the sport's schedule won't be significantly affected by alert level restrictions. The Silver Ferns 4-match series against Australia, which starts tomorrow, will now be played entirely in Christchurch. The absence of fans is a blow to Netball New Zealand's finances, but CEO Jenny Wiley says they are still planning for a full calendar.
Look, we would really be reluctant to go down a track of cancelling events, but again, COVID sometimes takes that out of our hands as well. So at this point in time, our intention is to play a full calendar this year, both internationally and domestically.
Jenny Wiley. Meanwhile, the third and final T20 cricket double-header involving the Black Caps against Australia and the White Ferns against England on Sunday will now also be played in Wellington and without crowds. And Saturday night Super Rugby Aotearoa game between the Crusaders and the Hurricanes in Christchurch has been moved to Sunday afternoon. England Rugby are condemning online abuse after one of its players said he received death threats after their Six Nations defeat to Wales. Prop Ellis Genge says he was sent abuse on social media after footage surfaced of him not clapping Welsh players off after their 40-24 victory in Cardiff. England Rugby says Wales deserved their victory and is urging fans to report offensive tweets. New Zealand's teenage alpine ski racer Alice Robinson has finished a career best 10th in the Super G event at the latest World Cup in Italy. That's the news.
A question of blame as Auckland returns to lockdown.
He does deserve some blame. He was clearly a naughty boy.
How severe should the punishment be when a rule breaker is caught?
The simple reality is we are where we are because people have not followed the rules.
But would recriminations cause more harm than good?
Everyone is angry. At the same time, the question for me is, how do we make sure that people tell us the truth?
Mostly well behaved. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Often cloudy with showers. Isolated thunderstorms for Northland and northern Auckland this evening. Localised downpours possible. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Also Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country. Often cloudy, with isolated showers becoming widespread and possibly heavy during the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, possibly heavy and thundery for northwest Nelson and Buller. Canterbury, Otago and Southland often cloudy, scattered showers during the afternoons and evenings, possibly heavy and thundery. And Chatham Islands, long fine breaks tonight, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a late shower or two. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Prime Minister is urging people to call out those breaking the COVID rules, but says it's up to police to prosecute. A 21-year-old Aucklander who should have been self-isolating visited a number of locations last week while potentially infectious with COVID-19. His mother went for a walk during the last level 3 lockdown with another woman who has since tested positive with COVID. Jacinda Ardern says it's not okay for some people to break the rules and let the rest of the country down. She's asking people to call out family and friends who are not following the rules.
Families and communities need to help people do the right thing. On a small scale, this means perhaps offering someone a mask on a bus if you see they're not wearing one. But on a larger scale, it's saying to a family member who you know should be isolating, don't go out. Or saying to a colleague who turns up to work when they should be isolating or awaiting a COVID test result, go home. Return when it's safe for you, for your workmates and the team of 5 million.
There have been calls for recent rule breakers to be slapped with tough sanctions. But Ms Ardern says while everyone is frustrated, it is up to police to decide on that.
If there is any question mark right now over there being consequences, those individuals are facing the full judgment of the entire nation. There are consequences, undoubtedly. But whether or not a decision is made to fine or prosecute, that decision sits with the police.
Ms Ardern was asked if she would like to see the rule breakers prosecuted.
Just as it's never for me to, if something is before the courts or there's a question mark over whether someone should be arrested or prosecuted, we rightly so have the independence between politicians and police, and I need to maintain that. But no one is accepting here that these breaches are okay. They were not. Plainly, everyone is paying the price.
That's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Meanwhile, the government is being told to roll out clearer and smarter communications to make sure they are reaching into every corner and culture of the country. South Aucklanders spoken to by Checkpoint today have expressed their disgust that some of the region's newest cases broke lockdown rules and advice to stay at home after being tested. But Manukau councillor Efeso Collins says some COVID messages are simply not getting through in one of the country's most multicultural centres. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe filed this report from Otara.
An all too familiar sight in Auckland South as a long line forms outside a flat-out testing station. Auckland is back in lockdown for the fourth time in a year, and people here in Otara are angry. But it's not the time away from work and friends or even the testing station traffic jam that has them up in arms. Instead, it's news two of the region's newest cases broke level 3 restrictions by visiting another family in the growing Papatoetoe cluster.
If people just follow the rules, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Not good, mate. You can't go anywhere. I wanted to get up and see my dad, you know?
Yeah, a bit brassed off because you're trying to follow the rules and somebody's trying to go around the rules.
But is the government doing enough to get the do's and don'ts out there? Are those key messages like the need to isolate after being tested getting through? Manukau Ward Councillor Efeso Collins isn't convinced.
I'd say that we need a clear South Auckland communications engagement strategy, that we should be working with organisations like South Seas, Vision West, Anglican Trust for Women and Children who have reach into the community and hand over the information to them. The bureaucrats have to let this go. They will cost us the war if they don't let go of this now, and they've got to let go of this power and trust the community to get the information to our households.
Collins says the government must get more boots on the ground here in Auckland South.
I don't think it is, and I don't think it's getting through with any real impetus at the moment. People respond to relationships, and what we don't have is people on the ground, social workers, youth workers, whānau water navigators, out there making sure that the message gets into our families. We've got to go directly into the home, speak the languages that are spoken in the families, which is Punjabi, Hindi, Samoan and Tongan, and make sure that people really understand this so the messages aren't getting through.
He's asking the bureaucrats to take a back seat so locals here can get the message across their own way.
So young people are on social media all the time. They're going to understand Instagrams. We should be TikToking this information. That's the kind of stuff we should be doing. But that's the problem when you've got the bureaucracy handling it. They are way too concerned about not ruffling too many feathers, which is why you invest in community organisations, because we can do things a little bit differently. We'll dress a little bit differently, talk a little bit differently, so people understand the message.
Collins says he sees plenty of evidence the messages from Wellington simply aren't making it to his patch.
Look, I still have people who ring us and say, can we still come over to your house and have lunch after church yesterday? Well, church was online. They should have been online. And there's no such thing as let's all get together for Sunday afternoon lunch.
Back in the testing line, Otara locals say people not understanding the rules will have dire consequences.
Whole community or whole of New Zealand's going to suffer. And in different ways they're going to suffer, you know, in lifestyle, earnings, you know, including maybe even in death.
Yeah, for the sake of everybody else, I hope the message will get through to everybody else.
Some here want stricter penalties for rule breakers.
Yeah, well, if the police do something, you know, if you get a test done, and you go walking around. They could arrest you.
Be a bit harder on it.
Yeah. Put them in jail for 24 hours or even 48 hours. That'll fix them.
The virus is proving hard to contain in South Auckland, so Collins says priority vaccines here should be given serious thought.
I completely support the idea of South Auckland being vaccinated, being a priority group. Look, behind our health workers, who are behind me now, our essential workers, we should be looking at South Auckland.
He says once vaccinations in South Auckland are complete, the rest of Auckland should be the next priority group. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And if you were listening to that piece from the Tunics, you can look on our Facebook page. There's a video that goes with it. On the other side of the city, businesses were making the now familiar snap back into lockdown operations. Bars, restaurants and shops have been forced to revert back to level 3 operations or close their doors. And as reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Simon Rogers discovered, another change in alert levels has been met with huge frustration.
Auckland's North Shore locked down once more. Down a usually bustling shopping strip on Hurstmere Road in Takapuna, it's back to social distancing and click and collect takeaways, though this time for 7 days. Shannon Rogers is the owner of Holy Shot Cafe. She says in order to keep afloat during the restrictions, they've had to scale things right back.
Yeah, we're shutting hours down, so there's myself and Tess, my business partner, so it's just us two working on site at the moment, and we're doing shorter hours, just trying to keep wage costs and things like that down. And then free part-timers as well, so yeah, it's just we're lucky that they're kind of university students, so we try to give them as minimal hours as they need.
They've also had to receive help from their landlord with discounted rent to compensate for a lack of business. Down the road is Jester's Pies. Owner Lynn Tan says another level 3 lockdown is worrying.
Definitely is not a good news for us. Of course, our sales has huge effect. This time, because it's longer term, so yeah.
They're relying on food delivery services like Uber Eats, but the main thing that keeps them going is the locals.
Yeah, we do have lots of regular customers and they do support us a lot. They go, oh, don't worry, we'll be here. Yeah, they are quite nice and make us feel like, yeah, we're all together.
And it's not just the hospitality sector that's feeling the squeeze. Florine Florist usually supplies to a regular group of businesses and hospitals, but under level 3, that's not possible. Instead, they're relying on online orders with contactless delivery. Owner Franca Logan says business is at an all-time low.
We've had a lot of events cancel this week. It's great that we can work, but it's actually more laborious for us. It takes more time. We have to buy online and drive out. And even today, my business is probably 60-70% down just for today.
She says they've had to keep ordering flowers despite the risk they won't sell them.
A lot of standing orders that we have with growers, we have to still honour those, even though we might not have the business to sell them. And but that also goes two ways. I wouldn't want to ever cancel standing orders with my suppliers, because they have to eat as well, just like us.
It's lunchtime now, and a bit further down the road we come across this fried chicken restaurant, The Coop. Manager Cheryl Kerr says she's only had one order so far today.
It's just very bad. To be honest, the businesses are not doing well. Streets are empty, no people around.
Even takeaways and pickup orders are dwindling for The Coop, and their usual regulars seem cautious to spend money under level 3 uncertainty. She says the main concern is supporting staff, but there's no work for them with demand so low.
We usually have 3 to 4 people working, but it's just me right now, so I can't really afford to give staff many hours.
For lease and close signs are littered across this usually bustling suburb. For some businesses, it wasn't even worth opening their doors in lockdown. Others have already lost the battle to COVID. For Checkpoint, Louise Tanuth.
And that story from Louise Tanuth and Simon Rogers will also go on our Facebook page. There is a video with that too. It is almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the programme, we'll speak to the Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson about the latest in this outbreak shortly. Auckland parents and students are once again getting on with at-home schooling for the 4th time in a year. About 250,000 children are being taught from home this week as Tamaki Makaurau endures alert level 3. Adam Jacobson reports.
Brianna should be spending this week with friends at school. Instead, she's learning from home. The 10-year-old isn't happy about being kept away from Clinton Park Primary School for the week.
Pretty sad, to be honest, because I don't get to do that much learning. Math is one of my favorite subjects. I kind of miss my friends and the park.
But she's enjoying online learning much more this time round.
Easy and a lot of fun, because I get to work home with my siblings, and when I need help, my older siblings can help me and my mum and dad.
While Brianna's receiving a tremendous amount of support from her teachers, her mum, Talia, can't help but worry about how the lockdowns might be affecting her daughter's learning.
The main concern I have is that, their learning will be disrupted, especially so early in the beginning of the year when the teachers haven't really had a chance to settle in with their classes much themselves yet. And as a parent, I'm not a teacher, so it's hard for me to know if I'm helping the kids in the right way and giving them the right support.
Steve Hargreaves, president of the Auckland Secondary Principals Association, says this week shouldn't have too much of an impact on students. But he thinks there'll be problems if sporadic restrictions continue throughout the year.
We've almost got to the point where we just think, here we go again, and we reach into our file and we roll out the communications to parents and staff and we just get on with it. But underneath that, there is a sense of deflation and frustration that this one was probably avoidable, and we just know that it's going to have far-reaching impacts on our students and staff.
Chair of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, Stephen Leithbridge, says while many schools were surprised by Sunday's announcement, teachers are now well prepared.
3 lockdowns, we are well practiced, and lots of schools will have their online learning platforms all in place, and each school will do that differently. We're really well practiced around the Auckland region.
A student population, now becoming used to disruption, is now adapting to learning away from the classroom. Mō te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, ko Adam Jacobson tiene.
We're keen for your feedback. What do you think of the lockdown in Auckland and how has it affected you? We also want to hear from people outside of Auckland. You're at level 2. Should you be? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. While Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson is joining us now live. Good evening, Minister.
Evening, Lisa.
Is there still a team of 5 million?
Oh, yes, I think there is. Obviously, we've got a situation here where people are feeling pretty frustrated about where we're at, and especially when they hear that some of their fellow members of that team might not have followed all the rules. But we just have to have a little bit of perspective here. We've done incredibly well as a country at looking out for each other. Yes, we've had circumstances through 2020 where people didn't follow the rules. We've had a couple here now. I don't think that undermines the fact that overall we've done well at looking after each other, and maybe it's just a reminder here that this is not over. We've got to keep at it. We've got to keep being vigilant. We've got to keep looking after each other.
The Prime Minister today has urged people to call out their friends and neighbours. Do it kindly, she says, but if they're breaking the rules, call them out. Are you ready for that to go wrong? Because potentially it could.
Oh, look, I don't think it will. And the reason for that is actually that people do get this and do understand it. And I have to say, people haven't been reticent in calling out the behaviours that they don't like when we were in this period last year, and there were many, many stories about it. It's just a reminder we happen to now be back at a higher alert level. What I think the Prime Minister was getting at there was that, in this situation here, we've seen a number of examples of where people have gone to work or they've gone out socially, and others around them probably knew that those people were connected to this cluster in some way, and it's just a matter of everyone looking out for each other and saying, hey, should you really be here? Should you be at home? Obviously, under level 3, everyone's meant to be at home unless they have to be out for essential work purposes. So, and we just got to make sure we're using that spirit that got us through this to make sure we're not only supporting each other, but also holding each other to account.
Let's whip through some of the things we know or don't know about these current cases. So, the mixing between the two families, between family 2 and family 4, that shouldn't have been happening. What was it exactly?
So it was 2 members of 1 member of each family going for a walk with each other. That was during the early days of level 3. I think it might have been the day after we went into level 3. Clearly for both the reasons that we were in level 3, but also because one of those families was already, both within the Papatoa High School community. They knew that they should not have been doing that. That's unfortunate, but as I say, we've now got to move forward from that and recognise the important work we've got to do to keep each other safe.
So the timing's important. So the person from family 2, the mother from family 2, had been tested but hadn't had a result at the time she went out walking with this other person?
I can't give you that information right now, Lisa. Sorry, if you want to get into that level of detail, I might have been able to grab that for you beforehand. But it doesn't matter because it was alert level 3 and they shouldn't have been mixing in that way.
Did it only happen once?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
And are these two families related in some way?
I don't know the answer to that question, and again, I'm not sure it matters in a sense, but they're both part of the wider Papatoetoe High School community, and clearly information had gone out to that community about the way that we wanted them to be acting.
Well, it does matter if they're families, because the bubble situation does allow you to have extended whānau as part of that in some cases.
Yeah. I don't believe they are. That's
okay.
Not the information I've got.
So how cooperative are these two families?
Look, they've been cooperative, and the situation here is that one of them did not disclose a particular contact.
Intentionally, Minister? Was that intentional?
Oh, look, I don't know, and I'm not going to sit here and cast aspersions on people in that way. You know, they didn't, and all of us would be challenged to remember every single contact that we've had over a period of time.
I do understand that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it is important, because if you purposely withhold information, that's different from forgetting, and it makes us question whether they are providing you with all the necessary information. So is it a question that's been asked of them?
Well, they've gone back and been re-interviewed, and that's the really important. That process has been taking place today, re-interviewing that family and that particular person to ascertain, you know, were there any other situations here that they hadn't disclosed, and then if that information comes forward and there are other exposure events, then they will be notified. But you know, the important thing here is that we get all the information from people, and that people do tell us the truth. And as I say, I don't have any information to indicate one way or the other whether or not it was or wasn't a deliberate act.
Are you sure that the families involved here knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing?
I would certainly hope so. Certainly those families that are part of the Papatoetoe High School community should have. Emails and communications were sent out from the high school very clearly outlining what the situation was, what the obligations were. We also know that regional public health, because people were close contacts, they were being rung on a daily basis. So throughout the period of time, you know, there's been plenty of contact with these families, and as I understand it from the Papatoetoe High School Facebook page, there's been a number of things translated into different languages and so on. So across that community, we would certainly be hopeful that people were aware of what their obligations were, and you know, that's the reason why so much effort goes in to the levels of communication we have.
So what is the deal here? Do they not believe in COVID?
Honestly, I can't answer that question for you, Lisa. You know, I think that most people...
Again, isn't that important information, Minister, because it kind of forms how you approach the situation. If it's defiance rather than ignorance, if it's an ideological thing, then there are different ways to deal with it. So will you be asking those questions?
Again, I've got nothing to indicate that it's a question of defiance. Bear in mind that these people have gone into quarantine conditions. They've answered a lot of questions. They've continued to answer those questions. I don't think, again, there's any evidence of that whatsoever. It's just a lesson to all of us that it is important to be able to answer every question, to go back over, please be scanning, because, of course, that would help us get a lot more information out as well. And if you're not able to scan, that you're writing down where you go. You know, it's a reminder of those things. I understand where you're going with the line of questioning around where and to what extent these people can be held accountable or culpable for this. The most important thing for us at the moment is to get all the information out so that we can contact the people we need to contact and keep New Zealanders safe.
It's actually not about holding them to account in the sense of whether they should be prosecuted or not. It's important to have full information so that you know if they've been anywhere else.
And that's the reason.
And to be able to trust them to tell you that.
Sorry to interrupt you this time. That's the very reason why we're going back and re-interviewing those people. And, you know, the feedback I've had is that people generally across the board have been really good when questions have been asked. On this occasion, a piece of very important information wasn't passed on. We've gone back to check if there's any more within that, but I don't have any information or evidence to say that there's some deliberate attempt going on there.
And there's no more new information about potential interactions?
No, not at this stage.
Okay, I'm interested in Kerry Logistics. So this is a company that's been named as the company where Case M occasionally worked as a contract worker. And this was discussed at the press conference on Saturday. So Kerry Logistics says they heard about the situation in the media. Why didn't someone from Ministry of Health get in contact immediately?
Well, the normal protocols here are that every attempt is made to get hold of people, but we also balance that against the importance of getting information out as quickly as possible. And you might recall earlier on in the first wave of this, and a couple of weeks ago, there was criticism where locations weren't given while businesses were attempted to be contacted. So the criticism cuts both ways. Either we're too quick or we're too slow on it. My understanding is the Ministry of Health attempts to contact, but then a certain point is reached where we need to get that information out. Again, if you'd let me know before the interview you wanted that level of detail, we can go away and find out for you.
Apologies for that, Minister. Sorry, I thought you were here as the all-of-government spokesperson. But
yep,
in terms of...
we're at a fairly quite detailed level here, so I'm more than happy to go away and find out. I'm answering you with the information I know, which is that normally the protocol is an attempt is made to contact, but there usually will come a point when we need to let the public know about where exposure situations are. We get criticised for not doing that quick enough. You're criticising us for doing it too quickly. That's how we go.
No, so it's important to get the information out fast, and that's why you did it. So then why is it not on the locations of interest, that company?
Well, again, we'll need to talk to the Ministry of Health about that. Normally, if there is a location of interest, there have been contacts there that they attempt to follow those up. So I wouldn't be able to tell you particularly why it is or it isn't.
So in terms of the rest of the country, why do they need to be at level 2?
Well, for two reasons. The first is that we have a large number of people who have been in Auckland and travel out of Auckland over the periods of time that this exposure for Case M has been in play. Bear in mind we're talking about potentially up to a week of that person moving around, and there are people in Auckland who may or may not have been exposed to them. And that's important that we give that level of security and assurance to people that we're looking after those people outside of Auckland just as much as we are looking after the people inside Auckland.
It is possible to ring-fence the city. That's what the checkpoints are for. And I may have misunderstood him, but the DG of Health said at the press conference, from my recollection, that the close contacts had been identified and none of them had left Auckland.
I'm not. I mean, most of the close contacts definitely are in Auckland. That would be a very, very true statement to make. But, we have a situation here, if you think about the way in which this particular cluster developed, that we've had people, within the school environment who weren't close contacts. There were people who just, walked past somebody perhaps on the way to the bathroom or in a common area who've ended up being infected. So just because you're close contact doesn't mean that there isn't some risk. And I think, ultimately this is a part of a precautionary approach. Level 2 is a level in which most activities can continue and indeed are continuing. We just limit some of the large-size gatherings and try to create a situation where the public health measures are able to really take hold. So level 2 is of some restriction, but certainly enables most activities to take place.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is the Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson. Now, we've just had a statement from the police regarding the Prime Minister's comments that it's up to police to deal with rule breakers. The statement says, in cases where individuals have failed to comply with specific orders from health officials to self-isolate, police may investigate when referred relevant information by the Ministry of Health. At this stage, we have not received referrals, and we continue to focus on working with individuals, whānau and communities to support them to isolate and be tested. Police will continue to work with public health as we have to date, including to assist finding people who should be isolating and who prove difficult to find. And coming up up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the COVID collateral damage is hitting the South Island hard, but does it have to? The Aussie Prime Minister is facing a cabinet crisis with one of his ministers facing rape allegations. And is our government delusional about efforts to quash gangs? We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister says it's not up to politicians to decide if rule breakers should be prosecuted. But Jacinda Ardern is urging people to call out others who are disobeying COVID-19 restrictions. A 21-year-old who should have been self-isolating visited numerous locations last week while potentially infectious. He picked up the virus from his mother, who went for a walk during the previous Level 3 lockdown with another woman who was unknowingly infected with COVID-19. Jacinda Ardern says it's not okay for some people to break the rules and let the rest of the country down. She says, however, prosecutions over breaches are a matter for police. The next group after border workers and their families to be vaccinated will be frontline non-border health workers. This group will comprise of 57,000 people. The police want to hear from anyone who has video footage of the incidents that led to police fatally shooting a man in South Auckland last week. Officers were called to Avis Avenue in Papatoetoe on Thursday night after a shot was fired through the window of a home. The police say they tried to negotiate with Tangaru Noereturia, but when he emerged from a house with a gun, he was shot. The Mayor of Napier will meet with police after a serious shooting in the city. 2 people were injured in a clash between gangs at the Thirsty Whale nightclub in Ahuriri early on Sunday morning. 2 people are in police custody. Just over a year ago, a shooting incident in the suburb of Taradale caused uproar. Mayor Kirsten Wise is repeating her call for more help. Golfer Tiger Woods says he's overwhelmed by the tributes paid by his colleagues in the sport after he crashed his car and suffered serious leg injuries. Other golfers adopted Woods' signature red shirt yesterday, and Woods says every golfer and every fan is truly helping him get through what is a tough time. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business news now with Giles Beckford, who is in our Wellington studio. Well, a lot of conversation today about COVID, Giles, and the economic cost of the lockdown is in estimated $240 million from ASB.
Yeah, that's what they call a back of the envelope figure, and I don't think anybody could put a real price on it. But they've tried to tell you the numbers. They take into account the fact that there'll be 2 weekends in the current lockdown period that may exacerbate things. But they make the point also that businesses now got themselves a little bit used to it. They've got some practice systems and procedures and click and collect, and consumers are also a bit more adept at handling the lockdowns or the lift in the alerts, so perhaps the cost might not be so bad. So we'll wait and see on this one. One of the points made by other economists is that, of course, this may be the coup de grace for some companies that have just been hanging on by their financial fingernails. Now, there are, of course, schemes from the government there to support companies, I think to the tune of about $21,000 a week. So that may help some, but for others, this really might well be the final straw that breaks them. And from that point of view, the hospitality sector will be the one that bears the brunt of that. And the other thing is the longer term loss of confidence, and you can never really put a value on this, but people become more cautious about investing, about doing business, about spending, this sort of thing. It just raises the financial anxiety through the economy just that little bit more. So those are the unseen consequences, apart from the dollars and cents that businesses can tally up at the end of the week.
And it seems, Giles, that apples, there's money in them, there are apples for Turners and Growers.
Turners and Growers, as to what it used to be, for those who remember Turners and Growers, now known as T&G Global. It's owned by a very large German firm, BayWa. but apples is it. They're a produce grower and exporter. Normally, the profit, which is around $16.5 million, wouldn't excite too much interest if you weren't a shareholder or a supplier. But the interesting thing about this one is that they've developed a couple of varieties, Jazz and Envy. Now, we see them here in our own supermarkets, but they're enormous sellers overseas, particularly in Asia. And to me, this is something that we tend to forget. We talk about intellectual property, and we think that's sort of game designs and smart computers and Fisher & Paykel Healthcare's smart humidifiers and sleep apnea equipment and the like. But this is an example of New Zealand's intellectual property, that these are varieties developed in this country, grown in this country. I don't know if they're licensed at the moment to be grown overseas. Kiwi fruits are another example of that. And it just sort of highlights how dependent we are on agriculture, primary produce, but in fact, what progress and strides and value we have locked up in the produce that we develop and we sell.
I love myself a good Jazz apple there, Giles. What other numbers do you bring from the markets?
Well, I had to ring up the Guinness Book of Records because we've had 2 positive share market days in a row now. The top 50 index gaining 75 points, about 2/3%, just over 12,300. And on the currency front, New Zealand dollar sitting in around 72.6 US cents, just a whisker under 94 Australian and 52 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. That's Giles Beckford with our business news joining us from the Wellington studio today. The owner of a Hawke's Bay bar where a stray bullet from a shootout injured a staff member says the government is delusional about its efforts to quash gangs. There have been several gang-related shooting incidents in the region over recent weeks. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
Walk along West Quay in Ahuriri, Napier, and typically you'll marvel at the tranquil waterfront nestled against a backdrop of beautiful hills. But last Saturday night, it was anything but a picture of calm. Thirsty Well owner Chris Sullivan was having a good night, right up until a stray bullet from shooting between 2 gangs wounded one of his staff.
They had a confrontation of abuse, physical fighting, and then shots were fired, and one of the guys ran in front of our bar. And the shots seemed to follow him when one of our doormen was struck. We were totally innocent and it could have happened anywhere.
Chris Sullivan says something urgently needs to be done to stop this.
I just think the government needs to sort of address the issue that we have got a gang problem in New Zealand and getting worse. Hawke's Bay seems to have a serious gang issue with all these incidents. I mean, ours is not an isolated incident. How many shootings have we had in the last few months? I can think of 4. They're delusional if they think this gang problem is going to go away. They need to address it. Obviously the gun buyback has only affected the nice people that haven't got guns anymore, and these gangs seem to have more guns than ever.
A neighbouring restaurant and bar, the Gin Trap, was closed at the time, but fragments of a bullet flew through a window, hitting a wall. Police wouldn't be interviewed today, but in a statement, Eastern District Commander Jeanette Park said officers caught 2 men who they believe are connected to the incident. They were apprehended after a short pursuit near Hastings. 1 man ran into a stream, but police were able to catch him. Police haven't charged anyone yet. They say they're talking to senior members of Hawke's Bay gangs to re-establish calm. Local councillor Keith Price, who used to part-own the Thirsty Well and used to be a cop, says he was shocked to hear the news.
They happen along West Quay, which is a very, very popular place with high density of people on a Saturday night. It's scary. I mean, it's so dangerous, and from what I can gather, there's a lucky we've got a loss of life. Napier
Mayor Kirsten Wise is meeting with local police tomorrow. In January last year, the community in the suburb of Taradale were in uproar after another gang shooting. Ms Wise said at the time they needed more support from central government. She says she's still making that case.
At the end of the day, incredibly supportive of what our local police have been doing over the last 12 to 15 months, and I think that we do need some additional resourcing and additional support from central government, because we can't continue to have these types of incidents happening in our community.
Wairoa in Northern Hawke's Bay has also had its fair share of gang incidents recently, 1 man even turning up to hospital with a gunshot wound to his leg. Its Mayor Craig Little says the key to stopping the problems is to help the police solve crimes.
The key to the police doing really well is intel from the public. And if you know something, for God's sake, let the police know, or let that 0800 number they've got for confidential information. That's what the police need.
Police in Hawke's Bay remained armed this evening as the threat continues. In Napier, for Checkpoint, called Tom Kitchener-Ho.
The ripple effect of the latest alert level changes is being felt by event organisers today, with many scrambling to reschedule, with others being forced to can their event altogether. While event planners have braced themselves for an alert level change at any moment, Auckland's level 3 lockdown, along with the nationwide level 2 restrictions, have still thrown a spanner in the works and left many in limbo. Jean Bell reports.
The Auckland Arts Festival was gearing up to celebrate its launch on Thursday. Instead, today, the team is scrambling to reschedule as many of the 70 shows as possible. Festival director Shona McCullough is crossing her fingers for Level 1 next week.
Level 1 would be dreamy dream world, and that means that we can proceed as planned. We will still need to look at rescheduling some of the events that were planned for this week. It's more likely that we might be moving to a level 2 scenario, so we're working through all of those different options with our plans in place.
She says the past year has been a rocky time for the arts.
COVID has been a really interesting dance partner for the arts sector. It's interesting, often there's a lot of focus on tourism and sport in the media, but actually the value that the arts sector contributes to the well-being of our society is immense.
Auckland Pride Festival has already grappled with the 3-day Level 3 lockdown 2 weeks ago. Festival director Max Tweedy says the team has been busy today rescheduling about 40 events which are postponed to later in March and April.
40 events is not a small number of events to be happening post February, but yeah, we're just excited for a return to Alert Level 1 so that we can kind of continue to have our communities come together and share their stories and celebrate who they are and fight for progress.
Sporting events have also taken a hit. More than 2,300 athletes were due to converge on Queenstown this Saturday for the annual Motatapu running and cycling event, but the event has been canned. Race organiser Gemma Pesquet says a huge amount of work has gone into the race over the last 4 months.
I was working because there's a lot going on the week before the race, and I went up and I was like, got the news on, I was like, this can't be good. And then as soon as she said the rest of the country alert level 2, 7 days, I actually burst into tears.
Ms Pesquet says her thoughts are mostly with the athletes who have been training to take part. She says they looked at postponing the event, but logistically it doesn't work.
All the suppliers, making sure that they could suit a new date. And one of the key things with Motatapu, we are in a mountain alpine environment, and so the weather actually plays a huge part in the event, and the more that we push back later in the year, obviously the worse the weather conditions can get. So that has been a huge consideration when we've been looking at postponement dates, and so it just wasn't going to work.
The ripple effect has been felt up and down the country, with the rest of New Zealand in Level 2. Netball's Constellation Cup series between the Silver Ferns and Australian Diamonds will go ahead in Christchurch, but fans won't fill out the stands as games will be closed to the general public. Jenny Wiley, Netball New Zealand's chief executive, says the cost of that is still being worked out.
I can tell you it's not an insignificant amount of money for us as a women's sport. But it is one of those things that we were aware of being a risk as we went into this, and unfortunately this is the way that the cards have fallen.
The remaining Black Caps games against Australia and the White Ferns games against England will all be played in Wellington behind closed doors. The start of the America's Cup match in Auckland is also being delayed by at least 4 days. The races between Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa will be halted until at least March 10th. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jean Bell tēnei.
The rest of New Zealand is in COVID alert level 2, despite the current outbreak being centred in Auckland. That means for everywhere outside of Auckland, gatherings are limited to 100, meaning large-scale events are being scrapped for this week at least. Queenstown Mayor Jim Bolt joins me now. Jim, how is alert level 2 treating you guys?
Oh, look, brings another round of difficulties. Yeah, I guess, things are pretty tough down here anyway. This certainly isn't helping. I just heard you talking about Motatapu being cancelled. That's a bit of a disaster, major disaster really, because big event for both Queenstown and Wanaka.
So should you be in alert level 2 in your view?
Look, to be honest, I kind of wonder whether we should. It sounds a bit trite to say we're okay down this end of the country, but we are. And I think from where we sit, it is a bit of overkill. We have to have our economy carry on, and we can't at the present time.
Have businesses adapted as much as they can, though? When you say business can't carry on?
Well, look, I had a discussion the other day with the Prime Minister who suggested that businesses in our region need to pivot. If you don't have any customers, I said to her, I don't know how you pivot. Simply, if you're a restaurant in Queenstown or Wanaka and you haven't got any customers, what do you do? I've got businesses telling me that their turnover for February was in excess of 90% down on February last year. People say to me, businesses should have kept some reserves for when things get tough. We've been like this for a year. We're maybe going to face another year. I don't care how much money you had at the start, you're going to run out.
Jim, I sense more than a little bit of frustration from you.
Yeah, it's, from where I sit, I'm getting daily phone calls and emails from folk just desperate.
So you touched on conversations there with government, but how much are they taking their views into account and are you getting a chance to have your say?
Oh, look, they've listened to what we've got to say, and we've put a raft of suggestions forward as to how we can be helped. What I'm worried about is that when tourism does come back, it'll be a bunch of empty shops and closed restaurants, and that would be a disaster. We have to keep a core business going, and I just can't see that happening at the present time.
So, Jim, what are your suggestions for the immediate here and now for how they could help you?
We do think that a reintroduction of the wage subsidy for targeted industries and businesses is a way to go. If people are going to be unemployed, then paying them something to stay in jobs seems like a zero-cost exercise from where we sit. You could say that people can go elsewhere in the country and get jobs, but that would rip the guts out of our communities. Don't think that's good. We've suggested some form of travel incentive to get people travelling around the countryside.
You mean like in Australia where they give everybody a certain number of credits and let them loose around the country?
Yep, you got it. We think that's a good idea. We think even some sort of business loan to smaller businesses. We've got the STAP thing going, which has only helped bigger businesses. Some sort of advance to smaller businesses that maybe if they're still around in 3 years' time with, say, 80% of their staff they had before COVID gets written off over a period of time. Some initiatives like that we think would be worth considering.
Jim, have they given you any indication that they're prepared to push forward with any of those recommendations?
I don't have anything at this point in time, but, look, I'm carrying on discussions with government departments, not giving up. We are determined to carry on and support our local communities.
And when did you last have a conversation with the Tourism Minister?
2 weeks ago today.
Okay, and any assistance forthcoming from him?
Look, he's very proactive and he's undertaken to come down here. Expect to see him here sometime during March this month and very much look forward to a conversation with him when he gets here.
Could you put a number on how much this is costing you, being at level 2 for a week?
Oh, no, look, I can't. I just haven't had time to think about it today, but I know it's a hell of a lot. I went down to buy a sandwich earlier in the day and you can fire a gun down the main street.
So let me put it another way. Do you anticipate that some businesses who are closed or unable to do their thing at level 2 will not survive this 7 days?
Oh, look, again, I can't say that because I can't comment on where individual businesses are, but I know some are teetering and I'm picking that this will be the end for some.
Jim, really appreciate your time. That is Jim Bolt, who's the Queenstown Lakes District Mayor. It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, after 6 tonight, we head back to South Auckland, where some have been tested for a third time on another loop of the COVID roller coaster. Now, a lot of you have been getting in touch with your feedback. Let's get to some of that. On the rest of the country being at level 2, which was what we were just talking to Jim about. Yes, we should be at level 2, says Leslie. The number of Aucklanders who leave town as soon as a shutdown is announced and put everyone else in the country at risk makes it essential. Yeah, that's a good point, Leslie. Someone else says, why should the South Island suffer more damning cancellations of events that support athletes achieve targeted goals? Rowing South Island secondary schools, rowing the Motatapu, but more importantly, the towns that these events are held are already under huge economic stress. Ross in Christchurch says the 2 netball tests here should be open to spectators. The risk is low, the lockdown note is short, and a whole lot of really disappointed fans. This is an example of an event that deserves an exemption. And there's a lot more. We'll hopefully get to some more of it later on in the program. Allegations of rape and sexual assault in Australian federal politics have shone a light on the dark underbelly of Parliament House and prompted victims of sexual assault across the country to seek help. Prime Minister Scott Morrison is being pressured to show how he's cleaning up serious cultural problems. But now Mr Morrison is experiencing a crisis within his own cabinet, with one minister facing an historic rape allegation and whether the man should stand down until the matter is investigated. The ABC's Matthew Doran reports.
Brittany Higgins shone a light on the dark underbelly of Parliament House when she went public a fortnight ago with her allegations she'd been raped by a colleague in the ministerial wing of the high security building in March 2019. Her story has resonated across the country.
Women and young people are telling us that they're very pleased to hear that this is a discussion that is on the national level.
Karen Hogan is the chair of the Victorian Centres Against Sexual Assault.
It obviously happens right across our world, and if it happens in Parliament, then it'll happen in lots of places, and we actually need to do something about it. And maybe now it's time for lots of victim survivors of sexual abuse to be able to tell their stories and to be heard.
Karen Hogan argues it's hard to quantify just how many extra calls for help centres across Victoria have received in the wake of Ms Higgins' story, and those of other women coming forward alleging serious sexual assault and harassment by the same man. But she says the phones are definitely ringing more often.
There is usually an uptake in requests for services and contact from people who have been sexually abused about a week to 10 days after the media event. There was a feeling of hope that maybe with such a high-profile national debate happening, that maybe this is a really important catalyst to start to look at the role of men and women and relationships and consent and sexual assault.
In addition to Brittany Higgins' alleged assault, the Prime Minister is now having to deal with another distressing matter. An anonymous letter sent to his office late last week, including a detailed allegation of historic rape against one of his cabinet ministers dating back to 1988, before the man was involved in politics. Scott Morrison is facing demands for an independent investigation into the matter, which has been referred to the AFP in a bid to return some sense of dignity and safety to federal politics.
It's not Parliament per se I don't think Parliament per se that's problematic.
Former Independent MP Cathy McGowan says the pressure cooker environment that often exists on Capitol Hill isn't to blame for the allegations of a toxic culture.
I think it's the way that parties work and the allegiance people give to the party and the fear that they have of breaking out and being ostracised and being excluded from the tribe that makes it really difficult.
While in office, she tried to introduce a code of conduct for all parliamentarians and their staff, but argues she was knocked back by the major parties.
To me, that's a choice. You can't just say, it's too complicated or it's too problematic. I say, no.
Late on Sunday, the AFP was sent another allegation of historic rape. This time it was an email sent to Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson, accusing a current federal Labor member of Parliament of assault. The crisis deepening as the nation looks to its leaders for answers.
And that report was from the ABC's Matthew Doran. To the US now, where one woman's entering the Century Club in style. Ruth Schuster's set to turn 100 on Wednesday, but she's still working shifts at McDonald's. And as CNN's Shannon Perrine reports, she's got no plans to retire.
3 days a week, she wipes down tables and greets customers. Before COVID, Fridays were her favorite. Customers at McMuffins usually came with a performance.
Fridays about 30 comes, and we all sing. And we sing, "You are my sunshine." We all sing it every time they come in.
She misses the crowds of customers and her after-work activities.
I go dancing 4 days a week. You can't go dancing nowhere. There's no dances around.
If you're smart, you won't mention retirement.
I became a widow when I was 50. I've been working ever since. And I like working.
The birthday cards just keep coming. McDonald's even gave her her own mailbox. Turning 100, she says, no big whoop.
To me, it's just a number.
The birthday cards mean a lot. You can tell Ruth Schuster truly gets joy from being around people. People keep asking her why she loves her job so much.
I get a payday. I get paid, I pay my bills. And that's good. I never had a lot of money, but I always have enough. That's the way it is.
And what an amazing attitude. Some more of your feedback here on COVID. This person says, why is a breakout of MIQ any different to a breakout of self-isolation? So why is the government managing them so very differently? This is on the government as much as those who break out. Someone else says, I've worked at the Ministry of Health. There is a lot of distrust of communities that aren't like them. It's hierarchical, colonial and patronising, and they continually fail to see the problem because they just talk to themselves. Joe's got in touch to say, I struggle to see how a lack of understanding about lockdown requirements under level 3 could be the problem this time around. We're 12 months into life with COVID, and in the August 20 outbreak, South Auckland's response was fantastic. This seems to be more to do with complacency, says Joe. Another person is, well, we'll save that one for after 6.
RNZ News at 6 ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātaua tēnei. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is urging the public to call out those who are not self-isolating or adhering to the alert levels, but to be kind when doing so. It's been revealed that families in the Papatoetoe cluster broke level 3 restrictions and weren't self-isolating when they should have been. Ms Ardern says families and communities need to help people to do the right thing.
Perhaps offering someone a mask on a bus if you see they're not wearing one. But on a larger scale, it's saying to a family member who you know should be isolating, don't go out. Or saying to a colleague who turns up to work when they should be isolating or awaiting a COVID test result, go home. Return when it's safe for you, for your workmates and the team of 5 million.
Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand's success in beating the virus has been based on high rates of compliance and low tolerance to rule breaking. Meanwhile, police say they may investigate people who haven't complied with specific COVID rules. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has suggested it was the role of police and not politicians to chase up people who didn't self-isolate after being asked to. In a statement to RNZ, the police said to carry out any investigation they would need relevant information supplied by the Ministry of Health. Police said so far the ministry hadn't supplied any such information. Frontline, non-border health workers will be the next group to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Currently, 57,000 border workers and their families are being inoculated. Pharmacy frontline workforce and NGOs, including whānau ora, will be included. People who live outside Auckland but who have recently travelled to the city do not need to isolate at home. Many non-residents left the region yesterday when the alert level was raised. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says anyone who has recently travelled to Auckland should watch out for symptoms and get tested if they develop any.
Everyone who's been in Auckland up until Sunday doesn't need to isolate at home as if they were in Auckland.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. A passenger who arrived at Queenstown Airport from Auckland showing flu-like symptoms has tested negative for COVID-19. They have been taken to Lakes District Hospital in a moderate condition. Air New Zealand has been approached for comment as to how and why the sick person was allowed to board the plane. Auckland event planners are hoping for a shift down in alert levels next week. The Auckland Arts Festival was gearing up to celebrate its launch on Thursday, but the team is now busy rescheduling with the city under Level 3 lockdown. Festival director Shona McCullough is crossing her fingers for a level change soon.
Level 1 would be dreamy dream world, and that means that we can proceed as planned. We will still need to look at rescheduling some of the events that were planned for this week. It's more likely that we might be moving to a level 2 scenario, so we're working through all of those different options with our plans in place.
Auckland Arts Festival director Shona McCullough. Police in Hawke's Bay are continuing to carry guns tonight after a gang-related shooting in Napier at the weekend. Rival gangs were fighting outside the Thirsty Whale bar in the city when shots were fired and 2 people were injured. 2 men are speaking with police. The Thirsty Whale owner, Chris Sullivan, says the government needs to do more to quash gangs, with several gang-related incidents across the region in recent weeks. The Mayor of Napier is meeting police tomorrow to talk about how the violence can stop. An Auckland resident watched in horror on the internet as trees near his house and business went up in flames this afternoon. Chris Seymour had left the city to look after a family member in Whangarei, but saw the fire in the suburb of Greenhithe by remotely logging into his security cameras. He says he was shocked to see how close the fire was to his house.
In a straight line, it would have been 400 or 500 metres, I suppose. An awful lot of smoke, that was for sure.
Chris Seymour, the fire has been contained, but a section of Upper Harbour Drive is closed between Greenhithe Road and Albany Highway. Japan's state of emergency has been lifted in all but the greater Tokyo area ahead of its scheduled end in a week. It comes as new infection numbers throughout the country continue to slow down. Our correspondent Grace Lee is in Tokyo.
The state of emergency has been lifted in Osaka, Hyogo, Kyoto, Aichi, Gifu, and Fukuoka. Officials say the focus in those regions will now be to suppress the virus. Restaurants there will no longer be asked to close at 8 p.m., but most governors say they will ask them to shut down by 9 p.m. for now, in exchange for financial compensation. The Tokyo area will remain under the state of emergency until the scheduled date of March 7th, as officials say the risk is too high that infection numbers will bounce back. Public health experts are still concerned, saying that the early termination of the emergency may send a mixed message to the public.
Our correspondent Grace Lee. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Black Caps batsman Devon Conway says there is an upside for him in having the final 3 matches of their T20 cricket series against Australia all played in Wellington. Game 3 was always in the capital, but games 4 and 5 have also been moved there from Auckland and Mount Maunganui due to the COVID alert level restrictions. Conway is based in Wellington and ahead of Wednesday night's 3rd match says the changes are not all bad news for him.
A little bit disappointing that we can't go to Auckland or the Mount, but in saying that, pretty grateful that we're still able to play the last 3 games, and it's a nice little opportunity for me to play at the stadium, which I haven't played there before, so it will be a pretty cool opportunity and a good experience.
The White Ferns' 3 T20s against England will also all be played in Wellington without crowds. The Jamaican sprinter Johan Blake says he would rather miss the Tokyo Olympics than get the COVID-19 vaccine. The potential requirement for athletes competing at the Games to be vaccinated has been the subject of much discussion. But Blake, a former Olympic 100-metre silver medalist, has told a Jamaican newspaper he won't be doing it. The International Olympic Committee says vaccination is encouraged but not compulsory for athletes. Liverpool have ended a run of 4 successive English Premier League defeats. The Reds have claimed a 2-0 victory at Sheffield United, moving them within 2 points of a Champions League place. Chelsea and Manchester United drew 0-0. Tottenham beat Burnley 4-0. Arsenal beat Leicester 3-1 and Fulham and Crystal Palace drew 0-0. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, musician and transport geek Anthony Tonham getting ready for his new Auckland Festival show, celebrating the art of travel by public transport around Aotearoa. Ricky Swinell reviews the international cricket and Super Rugby on offer over the weekend, and Zara Barlow and Zoe Loanu, Gen Zs from NZ, on how the world looks from the perspective of a couple of Kiwis born this side of 2001 on Nights with me, Brian Crump, afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Often cloudy with showers, isolated thunderstorms for Northland and northern Auckland tonight. Localised downpours are possible. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa are also Waitomo to Wellington and central high country. Often cloudy, isolated showers becoming widespread and possibly heavy during the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, possibly heavy and thundery for northwest Nelson and Buller. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, often cloudy, scattered showers during the afternoons and evenings, possibly heavy and thundery. Chatham Islands, long fine breaks tonight, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a late shower or two. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Prime Minister's urging people to call out rule breakers, but to do it directly and kindly. It follows news that some of those infected with COVID didn't follow the lockdown isolation rules or health advice to stay home when sick, sending Auckland into alert level 3. All the cases are connected to the February cluster that saw Papatoetoe High School shut down and all its students tested, some multiple times. The school was actually supposed to reopen today. And well, joining us now is Principal Vaughan Quio. Vaughan, can you get a break?
It doesn't seem so, eh? But everyone's doing it hard this week, so we're just here to support everyone in what we've got to do over the next now 6 days, but was 7 days.
How are the lessons going? Do all your kids have devices that they need to learn remotely?
I wouldn't say all of our students have devices, but we're actively handing devices out over the counter today. I've got a skeleton crew on site at school today. We've made contact. We're starting at the top end, Year 13s, down through to Year 12, Year 11, for the same reasons as last year. They're the ones with the shorter amount of time with us, and we're trying to get devices into the hands of the most needy right now.
Have you got what you need to give out to the kids?
Yes, absolutely, because the ministry support we had last year in terms of giving out devices and us being able to retain possession of those was sensational. So, yes, we do. It's just a matter of tracking the people, the place and the device and getting them all lined up safely.
So this is your third week of disruption. How concerned are you about the break in learning?
Really concerned, and it's a little bit different than when we went into lockdown level 4 at the beginning of last year, because classes had started and relationships had been formed, particularly with your new teacher because it's a new year, all that sort of stuff. We haven't had the opportunity to do that in all of our classes, so it's just that little bit harder to get this plane flying in terms of online learning. Because teaching is a contact sport, right? You need to develop a relationship with the person in front of you before you can make learning happen. And that's really hard to do when you're some kilometres apart in different lounge rooms.
Do you think that you're going to lose some of your senior students as a consequence?
We certainly saw evidence of that last year, but that was more evident probably in the second half of the year. That second lockdown last year really hurt us, really hurt all schools like mine and really all schools, to be fair. So I'm hoping people are resilient and can persevere, but we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best.
So today we've heard from Efeso Collins, who is concerned about how the health messages are getting out into the community, whether they're pitched to the right audience. What's your experience been with that?
Varied. We try at school to deliver messages as simply as we possibly can. Sometimes when you get a pre-formatted letter from Auckland Regional Public Health Service, I realise that it's been through a number of hands to make it as simple to understand as possible. We sometimes edit those, sometimes don't, and we try and get into people's pockets, desktop computers, Facebook, whatever. We use every medium at our disposal to get that message into people's hands.
So do you think that some of the material that you're getting could be more consumable?
That's always the case. Whenever you're talking about complicated situations, and let's face it, the situation we've faced over the last couple of weeks has been complicated and rapidly evolving. So then you throw into the mix in some families where you may have second language families there, where English isn't the native tongue spoken at home. When you have the complication of what we've been dealing with and the complication of second language stuff, just makes things just a little bit hazy and a little bit more difficult to get through to people the information that sometimes they might need and want.
So, Vaughan, it's conceivable then from what you're saying that some people in the community still don't exactly understand what is expected of them?
Yeah, and one of the examples that I'd cite, I'd say yes would be the answer to that question. And one of the things I'd cite is I've started removing the word symptoms and replacing it with signs of illness, just to make it easier for people to understand. Because we make assumptions, particularly myself, native English speaker, we make assumptions about what word is easy and what people can understand, and we just need to check those assumptions from time to time. And now might be the time to do that.
The other thing that has been raised by Efeso Collins is that there are pockets of people in the community who are hesitant about vaccine. They're not necessarily believers in terms of COVID. How prevalent do you think that those attitudes and beliefs are in your school community?
Yeah, I probably haven't had any of those conversations with my school community, and Efeso Collins would be probably more up to date with that than I would. But certainly around my staff room, where those conversations may have occurred socially, there is a broad range of views. And whenever you get a broad range of people in a community, you will get a broad range of views. So what we've got to try and do is make sure that message, when the time comes to get into the community, is delivered in a very, very consumable and easy to access way.
Vaughan, in your staff room then, does everybody have confidence in the vaccine? Would everyone happily have it?
I wouldn't say everyone, no, because schools are. Well, I've got 150 employees, and that's 150 different views from 150 highly educated people, and so views in my own family differ, and so views across that range of people are going to differ. So I wouldn't say there is a lack of confidence or not. What I would say is there are differing views about the efficacy of vaccines in general.
And what about the existence of COVID and the effects of it in the staff room? Does everybody believe in that?
I don't think there's any argument there. I think we're all on the same page on that one. There are so many members of my staff who have family living overseas, who have lost loved ones, who have not been able to return for varying reasons, have people that are ill and they can't get home. Well, there's no question that everybody understands that what we're dealing with is a nasty virus.
Over the weekend, you made a comment about the current infections in terms of tracking them, and you said focus on weekend activity. Now, what did you mean by that?
Well, I think it's sort of answered itself today, because we weren't quite able to work out how Family 4 and how Family 2, or how Family 4 came to be infected, and it's come to light today that Case N and Case F went on a number of walks together in lockdown, and that is exactly the sort of thing I was referring to. Somewhere along the line, someone that wasn't a student seems to have gone against the advice, and that's been vindicated by the discoveries today.
Is there any evidence that you're aware of other interactions occurring that shouldn't have?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Really appreciate your time today. That's Vaughan Quio, who's the Papatoetoe High School principal. Now, just a note in relation to our earlier interview with the Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson. His office has called to say the reason that Kerry Logistics is not a place of interest is because it is not a customer-facing role, and the close contacts have been directly contacted. Now, this is in relation to the case, let me look at the flowchart, M. Case M worked occasionally at that company, Kerry Logistics, was a contract worker and had been on shift for one shift, I believe it was, during the time they were potentially displaying symptoms and could have been infectious. But it wasn't a customer-facing role, and that's why, according to Grant Robertson's office, it is not included in the places of interest. Since 2 new COVID cases linked to the February cluster emerged on Saturday, Jacinda Ardern's expressed her frustrations with their failure to follow the rules, ultimately causing Auckland to go back into Alert Level 3. But it's not the only source of frustration for Aucklanders facing their 4th lockdown. Here's our reporter, Sarah Robson.
Jacinda Ardern's message at her post-cabinet media conference this afternoon was clear.
It is not appropriate and it is not okay for members of the team of 5 million to let the rest of us down.
She says rule breaking could ultimately lead to a longer lockdown.
So that is why I'm asking everyone, now more than ever, to continue to back and support one another. And if that means calling a family member or work colleague out for not following the rules, then we should do that. Do it with kindness, but do it.
There's been plenty of anxiety amongst students at Manukau Institute of Technology, where the 21-year-old man who tested positive on Saturday attended classes last week. But the president of the Students' Association, Mika Sile, says he deserves compassion, not harassment.
You know, it's understandable why there's a bit of frustration on both parts from the community outside MIT and our student population as well. And that showed up in some of the comments that showed on news articles and on social media groups.
She says students are feeling less on edge now they've got more information from health officials.
At the time when the news came out about where the student was and mapping out his areas of concern, but I think today we've been in touch with a few students and they feel a bit more reassured after a more targeted message from the Ministry of Health.
The Ministry of Health says community testing centres around Auckland were busy today, with queues at the Otara and Takanini sites and wait times of about an hour. One man in line at the Otara station says he's had 3 tests in the last 2 weeks because he keeps getting caught up in locations of interest. His wife teaches at Papatoetoe High School and he shopped at Hunters Plaza, where a recent case went. He's off work again until he gets a negative result.
Did one on a Monday and then I did another one on Friday and then I was cleared to go to work, so I went to work last week. That doesn't really bother me as long as everything's getting done to prevent the sickness from breaking out.
Marette and her family were waiting to get tested in Papatoetoe. Her daughter visited one of the locations of interest and has since developed the sniffles. She's frustrated with the actions of some of the recent cases, but doesn't want people to be scared to come forward.
We don't want to scare people off from telling where they've been, but it's just using smarts really, just taking into consideration how it affects everybody.
Meanwhile, the latest numbers from police show more than 25,000 vehicles were stopped at the checkpoints around Tamaki Makaurau yesterday, and about 250 were turned around. Some motorists faced delays of more than 6 hours at the Mercer checkpoint on State Highway 1 south of the city, but it was a different story there earlier today, as Senior Sergeant Jonathan Chappell explains.
Today's remarkably much better than yesterday. At the moment we've got a tail of approximately 300 metres, so you're probably looking at a 10 to 15 minute wait. That's really good considering we're looking at the morning commute currently.
There was one incident overnight where a man was arrested at about 3:30 this morning for drunk and disorderly behaviour. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And some more of your feedback on the COVID situation. Greg says, strange that during the 3-day lockdown, South Auckland was praised for following the instructions. Remember the long queues of people waiting for tests. Now a big flip-flop. People are not understanding the message. How simple is stay at home when you have had a test, says Greg. And a short, sweet one for Grant Robertson. This one says, I'm not in your team of 5 million. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The United Nations says at least 18 people have been killed in Myanmar on the bloodiest day of protests since last month's military coup. Police and soldiers fired live ammunition after tear gas and stun grenades failed to disperse the crowds. The ABC's Masozo Ford reports.
Police, a woman cries from a balcony in Dawei in Myanmar's south as she watches officers forcefully grab protesters on the street below. A video filmed in the vicinity shows security forces firing their weapons and people running for their lives. Several are caught. Tear gas fills the air. My eyes are burning. Tear gas, the young woman says. Tens of thousands of people have marched into Dawei every day since the military coup a month ago today. Myanmar's generals overthrew the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi after claiming the election her party won in a landslide last November was fraudulent. Ms Suu Kyi remains under house arrest and calls for her release are getting louder by the day. In Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, Sunday's demonstrations were met by the most sweeping police crackdown yet. Hundreds of people were arrested. Officers fired live ammunition after some protesters hurled Molotov cocktails. This activist says the protesters had to defend themselves.
We want to protect our people, as the police can't do that. They are attacking us instead.
Quite clearly, this is an escalation. We're not just talking about rubber bullets anymore. We're talking about live ammunition and very serious injuries. People shot through the chest, people shot through the arm or the leg.
Phil Robertson is Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch.
This is a clear violation of international human rights standards, and the international community needs to speak out very forcefully against what has happened this weekend in Myanmar.
Later today, Aung San Suu Kyi is due to face court on charges of possessing unregistered walkie-talkies and violating coronavirus rules. At the same time, her supporters are expected to gather in their thousands once more to call for her release. Security forces will be back too, but this protester in Yangon says the people won't be intimidated.
We are facing so many crackdowns across the country, but yet people come out to protest without fear. We have so much courage.
And that report was from the ABC. Hundreds of foreign domestic maids in Lebanon were dumped outside their embassies last summer after the families they worked for could no longer afford their wages. Those scenes were both indicative of Lebanon's economic meltdown and an indictment of how foreign workers are treated in the country. The BBC's Martin Patience has spoken to the maids about their experiences.
Then they rape you. They can even kill you. You know, they don't know where they cover you.
For Lucy, it's been a long, hard journey. For a year, she worked in Lebanon, a dream that quickly turned into a nightmare of abuse.
The second one, you work for 16 to 18 hours per day.
Now safely back home in Sierra Leone, she wanders the markets, warning other women not to go.
85% of the people that live in my country have their daily bread from their family members that work abroad. But I found out that there is a difference of working in the Middle East and working in some of the other countries. We people never...
In Lebanon, domestic maids are largely at the mercy of their employers. And human rights groups say the country's economic collapse and COVID-19 has made a bad situation even worse. Last summer, I watched as women were dumped outside embassies in Beirut because families said they couldn't afford to pay them. Despite repeated requests, the Lebanese government wouldn't tell us whether anyone had been prosecuted for ditching their worker. In Lebanon, those that run away from abuse risk becoming illegal because their visa is tied to the family they work for. And that's why they hide. Tell me what happened to you. Why did you escape?
I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, then I finish work at 11. Then you don't give me room to sleep. I sleep in the balcony. You will not give me my telephone to speak to my son, to my mother.
Did he abuse you?
He slapped me, hit me. I just want to say that to the Lebanese people that let them stop to treat us like beasts because they value dog cats more than us.
Adama has now been repatriated back to Sierra Leone, but many others are still waiting. 250,000 foreign domestic maids form a largely invisible army of workers that cook and clean in homes across the country. Many in Lebanon see nothing wrong with a system that provides cheap labour. Ali Alamin is the president of what's called the Syndicate of Recruitment Agencies in Lebanon.
The situation is not that bad at all. Of course, there is some Lebanese families not good. Of course, everywhere there's people like that.
Well, I spoke to one domestic maid who said she wasn't even allowed to sleep in her room.
These cases, very few. The majority are happy with their families in Lebanon.
But the Lebanese government knows there's a problem. Last year, they tried to introduce a new contract that would give domestic maids greater protection. Here, Marlene Atalla, Acting Director General of the country's Labour Ministry, responds to one of my questions. It's pretty extraordinary that you have to write in law that a domestic maid is allowed to take phone calls from her own family.
At the Ministry of Labour, we think it's the rights of any person to be free to receive a call from his family. But we are afraid maybe in some house they don't respect these rights.
But in the end, the law never passed.
And that was the BBC's Martin Patience. A multicoloured parrot has been turning heads in the UK's Peak District. The bird's owner, Chloe Brown, has trained him to fly freely in the wind and then return to her. The parrot's called Motley and has become a bit of a local sensation. Ian White reports.
A 2.5-year-old hybrid macaw who's fast becoming an internet sensation.
So he's a blue and gold crossed with a green wing macaw. So he's got the very gentle giant nature from the green wing, but he's also got the very clownish personality from the blue and gold.
Motley started to get famous when his owner Chloe decided to take him free flying, training him to fly in the wild over the Peak District and then return to her.
Birds aren't meant to be kept in cages. I mean, in the wild, they will fly on average 15 to 17 miles a day. So we have to give them that exercise. They've got very complex respiratory systems and they need that exercise to keep fit, healthy. It's also mental stimulation as well.
It might look fun, but free flying can be dangerous.
You've got risks that are involved, so it'll be like birds of prey, the wind, just different obstacles, roads.
So do macaws make good pets?
I've had a lot of people when we've been answered about saying, oh, I want one. It's an 18, 90-year commitment. I mean, he will be going into my will. So I would never say to anyone, just go out and go and get a macaw.
Flying free, this bird has become a celebrity.
Everybody takes photos of him and videos. We found him in someone's music video yesterday, so he gets absolutely everywhere.
So if you're in the Peak District, keep an eye out. You might just spot Motley on the wing.
And that was the BBC's Ian White. Before we go, on the rest of the country being at alert level 2, Sue says Auckland tourism is suffering as well as Queenstown, as the rest of the team of 3.5 million don't come to Auckland. Auckland's CBD shops are further suffering because of the underground train and other renovations that make movement impossible. This is our 4th lockdown. Queenstown is not alone in suffering. Brent's got in touch to say, I'm wondering why the whole country is raised to level 2 when Cook Strait is relatively effective at reducing the number of all you diseased, infectious North Islanders coming here. Maybe Auckland at 3, rest of the North Island 2, and the rest of the country free as birds, says Brent.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police have not begun an investigation into COVID rule breach.